Hello, class. Welcome to the Odyssey. We're actually going to start reading the text today, and I wanted to upload this video as a walkthrough for you about all of the books, including the ones that we're going to read and the ones that we aren't going to read, because we will be skipping large portions of text. I will be explaining why those pieces aren't as important. I'll give you a summary of every single book. So this will be in one big video. I'm going to put timestamps in the comments so that you can find your book or your summary that you're looking for more easily. So we're going to start by talking about the different parts, why they exist, what sorts of structure the Odyssey has, and then we're going to actually get into the text and talk about the summaries of the books as we go along. So feel free to watch this one time through if you want to get a good view of the entire book. If you want to go book by book and kind of read or listen to a summary before you start reading or after you start reading to make sure you didn't miss anything important, feel free. But this is a resource for you guys to use as you see fit, because I won't be able to talk to you in class about some of the more important details that you miss from skipping around. So the Odyssey has three major parts. Part one is what's known as Son Seeking a Father, or we're going to call it the Telemachia from now on, which is just a fancy term for a series of books that are focusing on Telemachus, Odysseus' son, rather than Odysseus. So in the Odyssey itself, we don't get to the namesake character until book five. We actually start with his son. It's an interesting framing device. I think Homer made an interesting choice here of events in the order. So he starts with his son. We move to the Wanderings of Odysseus Part 2, which includes Odysseus's stories of all the monsters and people and gods and goddesses that he met. And then we go to Part 3, which is rather lengthy, explaining what Odysseus did when he got home to Ithaca and how he overcame the suitors that had taken over his house. So we're going to start with books 1 through 4. These are typically called, again, the Telemachia. So what we're seeing in the Telemachia is we're seeing the journey of Telemachus, Odysseus' son, on the hero's wheel, if you think of it that way. So Telemachus is about 21 when we start the story here, and he is just getting started on his hero's journey. He is about to accept the call to adventure. He is trying to be a true Greek hero, and he's not there yet. He will get there by part three, but I want to talk about what Telemachus is doing at the start of the story. So we begin with a prologue that explains who Odysseus is briefly. It explains what he's doing. He is currently trapped on an island with a sea nymph. We'll get back to that later and discuss why he's there and what's happening. But in the first book, Athena, the goddess of wisdom, comes to Telemachus to instruct him that he needs to call an assembly because there's a big problem going on in his house. So while Odysseus has been gone at the Trojan War for 10 years, his wife Penelope has been keeping the household going, and his son has been not old enough to really run Ithaca, so things are kind of out of hand. I like to think of the Lion King as an example where the true heir to the throne isn't quite prepared to take care of the kingdom. So what's happened is there's actually a bunch of suitors who have overtaken the home of Telemachus, Odysseus, and Penelope, his wife, and they're all vying for Penelope's hand. Some of them because they want to marry her, some of them because they just want to be king of Ithaca. So Athena appears to Telemachus. She tells him that you're not a kid anymore. You need to step up and you need to call a meeting to discuss what's going on in your kingdom. You need to be a leader. So, what Telemachus does is he goes and he calls an assembly of Ithacan leaders. In book two, we actually get a meeting between him and the suitors that have taken over his house. He discusses the matter with Eurylochus and Antinous, who are the two main suitors. One of which, Eurylochus, is a little bit more even keeled. Antinous tends to be an instigator, extremely rude, and he's purposefully egging on all of the other suitors to eat Penelope and Telemachus out of house and home. So they're going through, they're stealing all their stuff, they're living in their home, they're eating all their food. Because they are guests, and so they can't really be kicked out in Greek society. So they actually blame Penelope for this. Penelope's been putting off finding a new husband because she really misses Odysseus. She's been faithful to him this whole time. So she came up with this tricky idea that she was going to tell the suitors, I'll remarry one of you once I'm done creating this tapestry. And what she would do is she would create some during the day, and then she would stay up at night and actually unravel it. So she was not making any progress. They ended up finding out when a couple of her maids betrayed her and told the suitors that she was tricking them this way. So now there's really a lot of pressure on Penelope, and they're blaming her for this problem. She just needs to take a husband. Why doesn't she just remarry and get someone to take care of the kingdom? Her son isn't able to do it. He's totally useless. She needs a husband to take care of this kingdom. So Telemachus is really feeling the pressure to kick his mom out of the house or force her to remarry or to take care of the kingdom himself. So he goes to a place called Pylos and a place called Sparta to try and seek answers to find his father and bring him home. So in book 3, the suitors find out that Telemachus has left town. They decide when he gets back, they're going to ambush him, they're going to kill him. And so while he is out, they're planning an ambush for when he gets back. He goes to this place called Pylos and he talks to Nestor, who's the king there. Nestor doesn't have much information for him, but he does tell Telemachus that he reminds him a lot of his father Odysseus and that he also has the potential to gain the favor of the goddess Athena and become a great king. So, without many answers, he moves to a place called Sparta, looking for different information about his father. He meets Menelaus and Helen, who, if you remember, if you watched my Trojan War explanation, Helen was the one who started the war because Paris took her back to Troy. So, she's back home with her first husband, Menelaus. They discuss how great Odysseus was. He was the best. He was super smart. He won the war for us. And they heard tell that he's actually alive somewhere, that he's hanging out on an island with a goddess, but he can't leave. So Telemachus is really pumped up by this knowledge. He's excited to hear that his father might still be alive, where he thought he was missing and gone forever. So he prepares to head home, not knowing that he's going to get ambushed and potentially murdered when he gets home. So that's where we end the Telemachia. Telemachus has now gone abroad for the first time in his life. He's sailed on a ship to go discover more information about his father. So his journey stops here for now. We'll find him again in the third act, the third part, when he decides to come back to Ithaca. But for now, we're going to transition into Odysseus' story. So we're into book 5 and part 2. Part 2 is the wanderings of Odysseus. What has he been doing since the Trojan War? It's been several years. He's been gone. No one knows what's really happened to him. There's a lot of rumors going around that people have seen him passing and going between places. What in the world happened to Odysseus, right? Where is he right now where his son can find him? So we start in book 5. This is the first time we see Odysseus. What happens is the gods are discussing Odysseus being trapped on Calypso's island. She is a sea nymph. She is a lower tier goddess, so she's not as high up as someone like Zeus, Athena, Poseidon, Apollo, and those others. So Athena is Zeus's favorite daughter, and she is Odysseus's patroness. So she takes care of him and helps him immensely throughout the story. We've already seen Athena helping his son, Telemachus. So she's very much a fan of Odysseus's family and his son. So she persuades Zeus to send the messenger god Hermes to talk to Calypso and get him set free. He's clearly unhappy and he needs to get home. There's this great prophecy about his destiny. Odysseus is prophesied to get home. He will make his way home. It's just a question of when. So Hermes the messenger god goes to visit Calypso. She's on her island. She invites him in. They eat ambrosia and nectar, which is something only gods can consume together. And he tells her that Zeus has commanded that she let Odysseus go. Calypso gives an argument. She basically says, well, I can make him immortal. Can his wife do that? I'm the most beautiful person around. Is his wife beautiful as I am? I'm not allowed to keep him because I took care of him and saved him from the ocean. But eventually, realizing that it is the will of Zeus and she will incur Zeus's wrath if she doesn't comply, she concedes to let him go. So she goes to find Odysseus. He is weeping on the beach, looking out at the ocean. He really misses home and he cries himself to sleep every night and cries all day because he misses home. He's been there for about 7 years with Calypso. She is a goddess. She is compelling him, as far as he says, to stay, but he's not happy at all. He really wants to get home. So Calypso goes and finds him and says, hey, I'm going to give you all the materials you need to get off my island. And of course, Odysseus, being very smart, is a little bit suspicious. So all of a sudden, after 7 years, you're going to let me go? That's really strange. I bet you're probably going to sink my boat when I get off the island or something like that. You better promise that you're not doing anything mischievous. So at first she says, well, of course, I care a lot about you, but the gods have decreed that you need to go. So all I'm allowed to do is give you a raft. What happens after you leave my island is up to the gods and to destiny and your own choices. I have no control over it. But if it were me and I knew what was going to happen on the way out, I probably would stay. So she tries to kind of strong arm him into staying, even though it's the god's will. Clearly, she's not happy about letting him go, but she does help him build a raft, and he does depart on his own. So in book 6, he is leaving Calypso's island. He's going to stop one more place before he actually gets home. So he is attacked by Poseidon's storm. Poseidon is not happy because we will find out Odysseus blinded his son, the Cyclops Polyphemus. So Poseidon is the king of the ocean. Odysseus happens to be trying to get home by boat. So having annoyed that god and evoked his wrath is probably not a good idea. So he gets sent a storm. He is washed ashore, completely broken and battered. He has to swim for days to get to this island of the Phaeacians, and he's found by the princess Nausicaa. So Nausicaa receives a vision from Athena. Athena basically guilts her into going and doing more chores for her family. She says, you know, if you're a really good daughter, especially if you're planning on getting married and showing your family you can handle marriage, you should probably go wash more laundry and actually help the family out a bit more. And we've all had that argument with our parents and guardians, right? So she gets strong armed by Athena to go be a better daughter. She goes down to wash her clothes in the river and she finds Odysseus, who is washed up on shore. So she says, go up to the palace, meet with the king and queen. They will bring you in and they will help you out. So this whole time he decides he's not going to tell anyone who he is. He's going to wait. He's going to be an unknown guest. Now, of course, in Greek culture, all guests are welcome. All guests are sacred. They are God sent, literally. So the king and queen don't really care who he is. They invite him into the palace, and they actually decide because he's so remarkable, he has this kind of aura around him that Athena has given him. He has this kind of grandiose way of moving and speaking. They decide to throw him a feast. They think he's a really exceptional guy. So they throw him a feast. They have a bunch of games. Odysseus kind of shows off a little bit with the discus throwing because he's very talented at sports and things like that. And so they sit down to eat in the evening, and a minstrel, which is another term for a singer and a musician, basically someone who would have a guitar and would be singing different songs, performs a song about Troy. And of course, Odysseus, having gone through the war, having a lot of trauma from the war, immediately begins weeping because of the memories it brings up in him. So he's really upset about what he had to witness during the Trojan War. If you remember from the Trojan War video, he actually didn't want to go to war. So this is a very tender spot for him. He actually starts openly weeping. So this kind of gets people's attention. They're like, okay, that's kind of weird. So then Odysseus, overcome with emotion, says, can you sing me a song about the Trojan horse? I would love to hear a song about the Trojan horse. I mean, this was 10 years ago that he went through these emotions and experiences. So they're all coming back to him. So the minstrel sings a song about the Trojan horse, brings up a lot of memories for Odysseus, seeing as he's the one that created it and came up with the idea in the first place. So when he starts weeping again, the king is really suspicious and says, who are you? What history do you have that you're crying over this story from the Trojan War? So this is when we actually get a history. How did Odysseus get here? So now he gets to tell us our story. The reason Homer does this is probably because he wants to show that Odysseus is not only a talented athlete and a strong warrior and a very cunning guy, but also that he's a great storyteller. So Homer is kind of showing us that Odysseus is also a great storyteller. He's letting Odysseus tell his own story instead of Homer telling it for him. So the following is going to be a story that is told by Odysseus. How I got to your island, basically. How I came to be here. This is where some of the most famous parts of our story come about. So in book 9, Odysseus begins his story. This is in Odysseus's voice. He reveals himself as the great Trojan war hero, and he says, this is how I got to Calypso's island where I just was before I was shipwrecked here. What happened was they won the Trojan War thanks to Odysseus's cunning with the Trojan horse. They sailed to an island full of people called lotus eaters. What they have is a magical plant that gets you very calm, and you forget your home and you just want to stay forever. It's almost like a drug where you don't want to stop eating the lotus. So his men are tempted to just abandon their way home right then and there. They're probably not going to go home or want to go home. So Odysseus escapes. He takes the men that have eaten the lotus already. He says, everyone else, don't even touch it. It's going to cause you to want to stay here, and we need to get home. And he takes those men, he locks them under the deck of the ship, and they sail away, and the effects of the lotus wear off, and they get away scot-free. Now, they sail to another island. This one is full of cyclopses. There's more than one. They're a whole race of giants who have one eye right in the middle, and they land on this island. They go into one of the caves of the Cyclops Polyphemus, and Odysseus, just purely out of curiosity, waits for the Cyclops. He wants to see what the Cyclops is about. So he's kind of got a chip on his shoulder. He wants to know what this big monster is about. Probably Odysseus is feeling pretty confident coming off of the Trojan War. Not much hardship has happened to him yet. Not much hardship has happened to his men. So he's feeling a little bit cocky at this point and thinks that he can kind of overcome anything since he single handedly basically won the war for them. So he waits for the Cyclops out of curiosity, looking for something of a challenge. And the Cyclops actually traps them in. There's a giant stone that only he can move. It's so huge that no men can move it. And he starts eating Odysseus's men, even though he implores him as a guest. Hey, we're guests here. You should treat us nice and let us go, and we'll be on our way. He tries to ask Odysseus where his ship is because he wants to destroy it so that the men can't escape. Odysseus luckily sees through that and says, "Oh, our ship was destroyed. It's already gone." So they're stuck in this cave, and the men are getting eaten every single day. The Cyclops really enjoys human flesh. So he devises this plan. He gets a piece of wood off of the Cyclops' giant club, and he makes a giant pike, basically, a spear, if you will, a stake, very pointed object, and they make Polyphemus drink wine. He chooses to drink all this wine, he gets drunk, and they stab him in the eye while he's sleeping. So he starts raging and panicking and freaking out. He's bleeding everywhere. It's a really graphic scene. But he stands in the doorway so the men can't escape. He's got his hands out almost like a hockey goalie, looking for those men to be traveling by, feeling for them, and he's going to snatch them up and just start eating them as they go out, so that they don't escape with their lives. So the way that they escape is they actually tie themselves under the bellies of sheep. It's actually really clever. They tie themselves under the bellies of sheep, and they tie three sheep together. So if the Cyclops kind of feels under the sheep, he's going to feel one side or the other side, but he won't feel the man in the third sheep in the middle. So they tie three sheep together. They all tie themselves to the belly of the middle sheep and kind of hold on for dear life. And they're actually like that overnight. So they're holding on. Their arms are probably shaking. They're losing energy, but they're waiting out for the Cyclops to let his sheep out in the morning as he does so they can graze. So he lets them out, and Odysseus and his men escape. They get to their boat. As they're leaving, Odysseus starts hailing insults and mocking the Cyclops as they're going away. Of course, the Cyclops hears him, and he starts throwing huge boulders to try and create waves to get their ship to turn over. And his men, Odysseus's men, are like, "Dude, you should stop. Like, he has his punishment for treating us horribly as guests. His eye is gone. We've stolen a lot of his sheep. We have him on our ship. Stop mocking him is probably not a good idea." But Odysseus, again, is feeling really cocky. "I figured it out. I escaped from the Cyclops. I won the Trojan War. I'm so smart. I'm going to start insulting the Cyclops." So he actually tells the Cyclops his name. He says, "I'm Odysseus. You can tell people that Odysseus kicked your butt, basically, and tricked you." So, of course, that was a bad idea because the Cyclops sends a prayer out to his father, who happens to be the god of the sea, the thing that the men are now privy to because they're on a boat. So he says, "Poseidon, you're my father. You need to avenge me. Make sure that these men don't return home. Or if they are destined to return home, like Odysseus is, make sure that their lives are terrible up until that point. They're going to have so much hardship." So the Cyclops curses them, and Poseidon is really mad at Odysseus and his men, which is not good because they are on a ship on the ocean, and that's Poseidon's realm. So they sail away, and this is when we see some of the hardships begin for Odysseus's men. They came off the high of the Trojan War, and now they've made a mistake that is going to haunt them for the rest of their journey. In book 10, they visit the island of the god of wind. He gives them a big bag of wind. He says, "Release this when you get close to home, and it'll take you right home. It'll push you all the way." Odysseus's men are really greedy, so they see the bag. Odysseus says, "Don't look in it. Don't worry about what's in it." He doesn't tell his men what it is. So they think he's hiding something and open it. And of course, the winds blow out and they're blown way off course because they didn't know what was in there. So another mistake on Odysseus's part. He did not tell them what was in the bag. So they open the bag out of curiosity and out of greed, and then they're blown off course. So they're way farther away from home than ever before. Where they end up is on an island of a witch named Circe. So while Calypso the nymph is typically portrayed as not really being evil, she's just kind of powerful and can do what she wants. Circe is a witch. She has bad intent in her heart. She wants to do harm to people for the fun of it. So she is a witch. She has magical powers that are used in a negative way. and she meets some of the men from Odysseus's crew who are checking the island out and turns them into pigs. So Odysseus goes to get them back, and what ends up happening is Hermes stops him on the way and says, "Here, you need to eat this herb because otherwise she's going to use her magic against you." So he shows up. Circe tries to turn him into a pig. He's immune to it. She says, "What the heck? What? How?" And he says, "Well, I'm immune to this magic. I have this magic plant from the god Hermes." And so she says, "Fine, you've outwitted me. I'll turn your men back into men, but you should probably stay here and hang out. It's super fun." So they have a lot of feasting and relaxing. They're just hanging out, forget about home for a bit until his men start missing home. There's only so much feasting and hanging out that you can do before you get kind of bored. So his men say, "Hey, Odysseus, listen, this has been fun. This year on this island has been really fun. Circe's a cool hostess. We have tons of great food. We really enjoy each other's company. However, we should probably get home. We're starting to miss our families." So Odysseus is kind of compelled to go and take his men off the island. What ends up happening is he talks to Circe about it, being a powerful witch, and she says, "Well, if you want to get home, you really have to go visit the underworld and talk to the prophet Tiresias." So Tiresias is a blind prophet. He is dead. That's why he's in the land of the dead. The idea with the Greeks is that because he was physically blind, he had more of an inner eye. He had a better insight into the future because he couldn't physically see. In the same way that if you cover your eyes or cover your ears, your other faculties and senses get a little bit stronger. And Tiresias is pretty famous. As a side note, if you ever want to explore Tiresias, he shows up in many other Greek works. One of the most famous being Oedipus Rex. He makes an appearance in Oedipus Rex where he gets mocked by the king and then turns out to be right. So, what we do know of Tiresias is that his prophecies do come true. He has never had an untrue prophecy. But in order to talk to him, Odysseus has to go down to the land of the dead. This is a very common theme in a lot of Greek myths with heroes. The underworld kind of represented this really dark and morbid place where heroes who thought that they were going to live forever and have all this glory had to face the fact that they were going to go to the underworld, live in the realm of Hades, and probably forget their human lives. They would drink of a river when they died that made them forget everything about their lives. So, really, the only thing that lived on when you were a Greek hero was your glory, was stories of you. You didn't even remember as a ghost your own life. So, he goes down and he has to actually awaken these spirits and get them to remember their lives so they can talk to him. And the way that they would do that in Greek mythology is they would actually slaughter an animal, and when the ghosts and the spirits tasted the blood, they would have their memories come back. They would become aware of themselves. So Tiresias drinks some of the blood of this offering that Odysseus gives him from I believe it's a bull that he slaughters. And then the prophet says a bunch of different warnings about Odysseus's uh, plans to come. So he warns him that he's going to be the only one that makes it home alive. His entire crew is going to die. They're going to die, and they need to be careful because there's going to be multiple opportunities for them to make it home safely. But if they make the wrong choice, they're done. They're all dead. So he warns them of a few monsters. We'll get into what those monsters are in the next book. But the big important thing is that at this point, Odysseus has gone down to the realm of the dead. This is considered his lowest moment, really. This would be one of his supreme ordeals. He goes through a few cycles of that. He'll have another supreme ordeal on his hero's journey when he gets home. But this is his darkest moment, both figuratively and literally. He is now in the underworld. He has this knowledge that he will be the sole survivor. So he has a lot of pressure on him as a leader moving forward with his journey, knowing that his men won't survive. But he's given all of this knowledge of how to combat these monsters that are to come. So they leave Circe's island having this knowledge. They pass the sirens, which are typically depicted as bird women. They're also called harpies sometimes. They sing a song that draws ships to their shore. They then wreck on the really sharp rocks, and then the harpies and sirens swoop down and eat them like birds of prey would. So they're deadly, but they entice sailors to come close enough to be destroyed, to be washed upon the rocks. So Tiresias had warned Odysseus that they need to put wax in their ears when they pass so the men can't hear the song, they can't be enticed by it. But he says that if Odysseus wants to know what it sounds like, be the one human person that has heard it and survived, he should tie himself to the mast and instruct his men to ignore any pleas for help. Because Odysseus passes the sirens, he starts pleading, "Oh, let me go, I want to go towards the rocks. Their music is so beautiful, I'm enticed." But his men don't hear him, they just keep rowing. So Odysseus is one of the few men, I believe, if not the only man in Greek mythology to survive the siren song and know what it sounds like. So who knows what he heard as he passed that island. So then they pass in between, literally a rock and a hard place. So there's a cave on one side and a cliff on the other. They pass through this really narrow strait. On one side, they have Scylla, a six-headed monster. I like to picture it like a dragon kind of creature, a six-headed dragon, but it's not really sure, just a monster. And what Scylla will do is she will eat six people out of your ship if you pass by, one for each head or gullet, as it's said in the actual poem. Then there's Charybdis on the other side. She is a whirlpool, and so she will swallow up the ocean 3 times a day, and then what's called she'll vomit it back up. So kind of a whirlpool pulling water into the bottom of the ocean and then spitting it back up. Of course, the force of the water would pull them down to the bottom of the ocean, their entire ship and crew would trap them there and then spit them back up, causing their ship and their bodies to break apart. So highly deadly. What Odysseus decides to do is he goes closer to Scylla because he says, well, I'd rather lose 6 men than all of my men at once. So he has to make a choice between a rock and a hard place. He makes a really tough choice there. So at the end of book 12, they land on the island of the sun god Helios. He has a lot of cattle. They're immortal. They don't die. They don't breed, but they're there for his pleasure. He really enjoys having his little pets. Tiresias warned Odysseus in the underworld, don't eat these calves, don't eat these different bulls and heifers, don't even touch them because you're going to incur the wrath of the sun god, and this will be your undoing. So Odysseus goes to pray. He's away from his crew, and while he's gone, they ignore his advice, don't touch the cattle, and they say, well, I mean, we can eat them and sure it'll make him mad. We can always build a huge temple to him later and, when we get home and we'll sacrifice all the bulls he wants. So we're going to kind of take out a loan now and we'll repay it later. So we'll take the calves and the heifers now, we'll eat them now, and then we'll give him back them later when we get home. Basically a credit card. Helios is not about that. He gets very upset when they eat his calves and his heifers and his bulls. So he talks to Zeus, and of course Zeus says, "Yeah, you messed up. Shouldn't have done that," and sends a giant storm. This is where Odysseus's prophecy comes true, where all of his men die. They're all scattered and killed in the ocean by the storm sent by Zeus. It is Odysseus alone who survives, and he makes it to Calypso's island and washes ashore, where he stays for 7 years with Calypso as her prisoner or willing volunteer. We'll see when we get to that book what we believe. So this catches us up. This is where we found Odysseus in book 5, right? He comes to Calypso's island, and when we see him the first time, he is there. So now we are into part 3. So he's told us his wanderings. We've seen what's going on at home. Now we're going to return to Ithaca, and he's going to take back his kingdom now that he's been through all of this suffering. He's changed. He's gotten much older. He's been through a lot, and now he's going to go home and he's going to take back his kingdom. So part 3 is the return of the hero. We're going to see him meet up with his son, and they're going to have a common goal and a common victory over the suitors. So what happens is the Phaeacians, who have heard his story, say, wow, that's crazy. You've been through a lot. We're going to give you a ship, some gifts, and a crew. We're going to sail you back to Ithaca because they are masters of the ocean. They are great seafarers. So they send him on a ship, and he falls asleep. He's just so exhausted from his journeys that he falls asleep, and he's gently delivered to the shores of Ithaca. His crew and ship go back home, and it's a really interesting story of what happens when they get back. They're actually punished by Poseidon for helping Odysseus, and they decide, you know what, Poseidon's really mad at us, and we kind of rely on him because he's the king of the ocean. So from now on, we're not gonna be nice to guests. It's a really interesting conversation, especially in light of how the Greeks valued hospitality. So the Phaeacians learned their lesson from helping Odysseus. However, he gets home to Ithaca safely. Athena appears to him as he's lying on the shore. She disguises him for his own safety, and she tells him there are 100 suitors at your house. You need to go and think of a way to defeat them, because simple brawn is not going to help in this situation. And Odysseus is not one to do brawn over brain. He's very much a brain over bronze kind of guy. So in book 14, he goes and he finds one of his old friends. He's actually a swineherd, someone who takes care of pigs. So in Homer's works, he's very unique in the sense that typically a lot of our Greek heroes are only really helped by gods and goddesses and only really care about the lives of other royalty, the kings and queens of the time. In our part 3, the servants of the household are actually going to be very important players in this final ordeal. So this is very unique for the time period. Homer was unique in actually giving importance to servants and slaves and things like that. So he meets up with his swineherd, who's very generous. He welcomes him in. He has no clue that that's Odysseus. And he starts telling him, "Oh, I miss my master. He was awesome. He was a great king. I really want him to get back." So Odysseus, in disguise, realizes that his swineherd has been faithful, and he's going to be a great ally when he plans his slaughter of the suitors later on. So, additionally, we have Telemachus' story. It starts up again. So, in his Telemachia, he went and found news of his father. He is starting to take his kingdom back and become a man. He is advised by Athena, "You need to leave Sparta right now." She doesn't tell him why, she doesn't tell him his father's back, but she warns him of the ambush the suitors had planned way back in book 4. So she says, "They're planning on ambushing you, so you need to be careful." What Telemachus does is he lands in a totally different area of the island and lets his crew go on to the city without him. So when the crew lands, the suitors don't see Telemachus and they are really upset that he thwarted them. They can't ambush him. So Telemachus instead goes to the safety of the swineherd's hut where his father happens to be. And this is where we actually get the reuniting of the father and the son. So in book 16, Odysseus hears footsteps and his son appears before him. And this is the first time in 20 years he's seen his son. Telemachus would have been about only 1 year old when Odysseus left for the first time, not to return until now. So he's seen his adult son for the first time. It's very emotional. And originally he starts talking and doesn't reveal his identity, but starts talking to his son. Um, Odysseus leaves the hut, and as he's outside, Athena lifts the disguise. She makes him look young and vibrant like he would have at the start of the war. And he comes back in to the hut. And Telemachus is extremely surprised seeing that this old beggar just transformed in front of his eyes. Pretty impressive stuff. And so he's wary. He thinks that Odysseus is actually a god pretending to be his father because his father wouldn't have that kind of power. But Odysseus talks to him and says, "Listen, I have the favor of Athena. Here's all this stuff I know about you. I am your father. I've been gone, but now I'm home." And he starts to get really overcome with emotion. And Telemachus then recognizes him, and they embrace and they cry. And they basically would have cried all night, Homer says, if they didn't have business to attend to and suitors to slaughter. So it's a very emotional moment between father and son, and a very open emotional expression of the joy at seeing each other again. So Telemachus and Odysseus and the swineherd are now all aware of what's going on. Odysseus is going to plan some kind of takeover of his home. So Telemachus and Odysseus go to the hall of Ithaca where his wife is living. And his wife Penelope is very excited to see her son home and welcomes this random stranger back into her hall. So Odysseus is still in disguise now. Athena has changed him back to a beggar. The only person that recognizes him when he enters his old home is his dog. He sees through the disguise and he dies of joy. He's very old dog. So he gets very excited to see his master, which could have been a tell to everyone else that Odysseus was home, but no one seems to notice. So there's a lot of tension here to see who recognizes Odysseus first. He enters the house, and of course, as a guest, he's treated very kindly by Penelope and the maids that are faithful to her. However, he's taunted and abused by the suitors. They throw stools at him, they make fun of him, they hit him, basically just showing how terrible of people they are. And they really deserve what's coming to them in the next couple of books. So Odysseus and Telemachus are secretly planning what they're going to do with the suitors. They are definitely planning on just murdering all of them because they don't seem willing to leave the house. So he goes to meet with Penelope and talk to her one on one for the first time. So he's still in disguise. Penelope doesn't recognize him, but she talks to him about how much she misses her husband Odysseus, how much she's pined for him, and how she really is pressed to find a new husband, but is not willing to do so, but has to for the safety of her family. So Penelope is making a big decision to remarry for the safety of her kingdom, for the safety of her son. She knows that the suitors were planning on killing Telemachus, so the longer she holds out marrying them, the more highly likely it is that he's going to get killed. So she has to do this to protect her family, though she still really misses Odysseus. He's really excited, obviously, to hear that she still misses him even after 20 years. She hasn't taken another husband. She still grieves for him. So he knows that he is in safe hands, revealing himself and coming to grips with his new life. So Odysseus and Telemachus are planning to slaughter these suitors. What ends up happening is Penelope and Odysseus go to bed, so she's thinking he's just a beggar. She actually gives him a lot of hospitality. She offers to give him his own room with his own bed, but he decides to sleep on the floor. And so they both have terrible sleep that night. Penelope starts praying to the goddess of Artemis, goddess of the hunt and of the moon, also known as Diana. She's planning on taking another husband tomorrow through a championship that she's going to put together. So she fears that a suitor will actually have her win her hand in marriage. So she's very upset. She actually prays for death. She would rather die than have to take another husband. But she is willing to go through with this plan to save her family. Odysseus, likewise, is also sleeping badly. He's racked with fear that he and his son and the few people that are faithful to him will not be able to overcome the 100 suitors. But Athena assures him that this is his destiny and he has the backing of her, the goddess of war and wisdom. So she assures him that he's going to be successful, and that gives him enough confidence to proceed, and she helps him sleep that night. So this is where a lot of the tension starts to come to a head. So in a lot of stories, we see that Penelope is like a lot of mythical figures, especially women, where there are challenges to win their hand. Since she is the one coming up with this challenge, she decides to make it impossible, so that she doesn't have to marry anybody. So she's just about as smart as Odysseus is. She says, "Okay, I'm going to marry any one of you who can take my husband's bow. It's this huge bow, like comically oversized bow, string it, which is difficult to do, and shoot an arrow straight through 12 axe heads." So the axes would have had a golden or brass ring at the end. So basically, she's telling them that he has to shoot an arrow straight through 12 small rings, right? Which is almost impossible. The only person that she knows who can do it is her husband, who she doesn't know is around. So she thinks she's getting off scot free without a husband. What ends up happening, of course, predictably, every suitor fails. They can't do it. They think they are all that, but they are not. And Odysseus actually comes forward. He wants to try it. And of course, they make fun of him because he's still dressed as a beggar. Ha ha, you're not going to be able to do it. She's not going to marry you, even if you can. We couldn't do it, so you can't. So they start to mock him. Again, they're being real jerks to the king of the household without knowing it. So he actually is able to do it because he's the only one that's capable of doing it. So what ends up happening is he shoots an arrow through the rings after stringing the bow that no one else could do. And so in a very dramatic moment, he throws off his disguise. Athena transforms him back into his former glory. Everyone realizes who he is, and he basically says, "You guys are done. This is it. You are done, courting my wife and harassing my servants and threatening to kill my son. It's over." So he's basically tells them, "You're all going to die right here, right now." A couple of them beg for mercy. They say, "Listen, this is the ringleader over here, and we were just doing what he said, and like he threatened to hurt us. So you should kill him, but not any of us. We're innocent. We promise we'll give you all the gifts and all the slaughtered calves that we took from your house back. We'll give you everything that we took from you. Okay, yeah, we spent 10 years, 20 years eating all your food. We'll give you that food back from our own household." But Odysseus says that's not good enough. You should have never done this in the first place. It's too late now. So of course they're apologizing because they fear death, not because they really feel bad for what they did. So there's two men that he's found to be faithful, but everyone else gets slaughtered. He and Telemachus do the job together, just murdering suitors left and right. There's just big pile up of bodies in the courtyard, and so he tells the housemates, the ones who were unfaithful to Penelope, to clean up the mess. So those who either cavorted or conspired with the suitors against the household, or those who betrayed Penelope by telling the suitors about her whole plot with the tapestry that she was weaving and trying to trick them with, those ones who had betrayed the household were told to clean up the bodies, and then they were also murdered after they had done the job of cleaning up. So justice in this realm is served. What ends up happening, of course, is Penelope hears about all of this. The nurse who works for the household runs up and says, "Oh my gosh, your husband is back, and he just killed like 100 people in the courtyard. So all the suitors are dead, and he's back." And she's really skeptical because at this point, it's been 20 years. We learned from other points in the story that she's had a lot of men come to her and pretend to be her husband to try and trick her into marrying them, but she keeps finding out they're not the real Odysseus and turning them away. So at this point, she's really cynical and kind of tired of people claiming to be Odysseus. She's very doubtful of him. She's actually kind of cold to him and kind of eyes him a little bit and kind of sizes him up a bit before she even talks to him. But she decides she's going to test him to make sure it's the real him by using a piece of knowledge that only the two of them would have shared, and no one else in the world would know. So, what that ends up being is Odysseus himself made their bed out of an actual olive tree. He carved it out of an olive tree that grew in the middle of their bedroom. So, no other man has been in that bedchamber except for Penelope's servant, um, who she mentioned. So none of the suitors know about it. No other man in the kingdom or the world knows about their bed being made out of a tree. So how she tricks or tries to trick Odysseus is she says, well, okay, you're my husband, sure. Okay, maids and servants, go take our bed and put it outside in the garden. We'll sleep there tonight. And he gets kind of angry. He says, oh my gosh. He's like, what happened to my old bed that I made, the one out of a tree? You can't move that. No one can move that. It's built into the tree. And so at this outburst, Penelope knows, well, this is Odysseus. He's the only person that would have known this. He passed the test. So, of course, she apologizes. Listen, you don't understand how many men have come to me trying to pretend to be you. I had to be careful. I'm sorry if I was cold, but I wanted to test you. And he's totally fine with it. He's so glad to see his wife after 20 years. And they embrace and they cry and all that good stuff. So, another emotional connection back together for those two. So the story doesn't end here, although it's a very nice, happy ending like we like to see in heroes' journeys and other tales. What ends up happening is, of course, we have this problem of 100 bodies in the courtyard. So these are all noblemen. The suitors are all noblemen from the surrounding area of Ithaca, from this island and other islands close by. So in order to avoid a civil war, Odysseus goes and talks to his own father, Laertes, about how to prevent a civil war. They tell the tale of what all the suitors did to his household, so his families understand that, yeah, they kind of deserved what was coming to them and accept that the slaughter was justified. So he talks to these different families, tells them about how horribly they treated his wife, his son, and himself. And they decide that they're not going to fight Odysseus for control of the kingdom. They think that what he did was just. So they got what they had coming to them from their bad behavior. So this is where the story ends. Of course, there is a prophecy from Tiresias about Odysseus dying in a foreign country that has never seen the sea, but he does end up living at home for a long while before he goes off to die away from home. So he does get to see his family grow up and his child grow up and become king of Ithaca. And that is where the Odyssey ends. That's the whole story. So what we see is it starts with his son. It moves to his wanderings. It shows us how he becomes a stronger person, a more intelligent and thoughtful and brave person. And then it goes back to discuss how he took over his kingdom using the knowledge that he had gained on his wanderings. So we see many different elements of the hero's journey here, and we get to watch Odysseus go through many hardships but come out the other side unscathed. Unfortunately, his crew didn't survive because of their own bad choices, but Odysseus does get to make it home and become a pinnacle of Greek heroism. So that's the Odyssey. There's your summaries of all the books. Again, we won't be reading all of these, but if you are interested in reading some of these, the ones that we skip aren't necessarily unimportant, but they do have a lot more conversation and they tell us a lot more about Greek culture. That's what we're skipping. I'm giving you basically a summary of what Greek culture is about and how the story relates to that. But if you really enjoy this story, I would encourage you to check out other Greek stories, other Greek myths and plays. I really encourage you to read Sophocles' plays or Euripides' plays if you're really interested. And you can also read the rest of the Odyssey if you're really excited about this story and really enjoy it, because the rest of the Odyssey is very cool. We're just skipping over the conversations and a lot of the world building and going straight to the most important parts and the most important steps of the hero's journey. So that's your summary. Those are there for you to use. And there's other websites too that will tell you the same thing, give you some good summary. So feel free to use this as a resource and come back to it whenever you need a good summary of the book. But that's the Odyssey in a nutshell.